So today's topic is mainframe multi-factor authentication. Stolen credentials are a means of defeating even the most stringent of identity and access management systems. MFA has become a standard tool for authenticating users and is now a must-have for mainframe system of record applications. So with us to share her perspective on MFA is Sandy Campbell from CDW. Sandy is a senior security architect here at CDW. She's a 30-year veteran of the mainframe. She's had various roles throughout her career, including as a JES 3 system programmer, a mainframe architect, manager, service delivery manager, delivery project executive, a Z client technical specialist, and is currently a mainframe security architect. She's also leading our effort for our mainframe security practice here at CDW. So let me pass it to Sandy to get started.
Thank you, Brian, for an amazing lead into why MFA. It's actually a great topic. We have a few items we're going to cover here. Why do we need MFA on the Z platform? I think that's probably where we'll spend most of our time. And then I do have a sampling from each of the larger vendors in the space, like IBM, Vanguard, and Broadcom, and then a small summary at the end. So why do we need MFA on the Z platform? Well, I'd like you to think about your Z platform as just another node in your environment, right? It may have your data of record. It may have a ton of applications that you're running. I mean, there's so much that Z can do today, it's hard to even keep up. But why not Z in this case is what I would ask. You know, it's proven that whether it's two-factor authentication or if you're even using biometrics and making it truly multi-factor, there's several ways to protect your environment. So let's get back to why. Well, everybody knows a lot of data breaches going on. It's not ending, right? It's continuing. This data came out in 2022. There was an increase, a 10% increase, you know, from 2020 of the number of data breaches. And back then, you know, it was the average total cost of a breach was 402 million. So now globally, we're looking at 4.24. And I think the most staggering statistics on this particular chart is the 20% at the lower left corner, where it talks about that 20% of the breaches today are caused by compromised credentials. That number keeps growing. The internal threat is real. And it's not necessarily that someone selling their credentials, it's that the savvy perpetrators are getting a hold of, and you know, your ESM data structure, whether it's ACF2, RACF, or top secret, and taking that off and offline, and then looking for someone with high credentials, and then coming back to, you know, do damage to your environment or take data or whatever that user ID had access to. So very, very dangerous stuff going on there. I think another staggering thing on this particular chart is the fact that the average number of days to identify that you have been breached is 287 days. That's almost a full year. And then once it is identified, it takes, you know, in this case, an average of 75 days to contain. So, you know, I think it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere, and we're always behind, right? So, and I think we'll always be behind because we're playing catch up. And so how can we make this better and safer for our clients? So again, this is just another indication of how costly it is. You know, there's some famous ones like Facebook paid $5 billion, Equifax, 575 million, et cetera. 56% of organizations have experienced a significant security event in the past year. 56, and that's increasing year over year. 94% of organizations realize that they have more to do to shore up their environments and make them more secure and less vulnerable. And 43% have admitted that they've taken shortcuts, right? They didn't follow through on everything that they should do to make their environment secure. So we still have a long way to go. It wouldn't be appropriate to not talk about ransomware, although not in the headlines day after day. We are still suffering ransomware attacks, right? Corporations still say cyber resiliency or ransomware is their #1 priority, right? In where they're spending their money to try to recover as quick as they can from a ransomware attack. And that's the same on Z. There are solutions that work on Z for cyber resiliency, et cetera. So multi-factor authentication is a piece of what you would need to do to be a cyber resilient, to have cyber resiliency on your environment, right? There's many things that make up a cyber resilient environment, many little pieces that can be done, and multi-factor authentication, or often referred to as MFA, is just one of many of those pieces that need to be in place. So I thought it be pertinent to include the whole gamut of what cyber resiliency, what do you need to do in order to be cyber resilient, right? Well, you have to identify which data you want to protect, and then you need to protect it, right? And how do you do that? Well, MFA is one of the practice methods that you can use to do data protection. The next thing is to be able to detect that you've had an event. And whether it's a breach or a ransomware attack, it really doesn't matter. You just need to know that something's happened in your environment. And then obviously you need to be able to respond. Once you know, what do you do, right? And then ultimately, how do you recover? And this whole infrastructure of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover should be in a plan. And that plan should be tested and executed on a regular basis so that when it does occur, you're not scrambling at the last minute trying to figure out where do we need to go, right? So I think it's important that everybody understands this infrastructure of what cyber resiliency is and how do you get yourself prepared for it. Again, MFA is just one of the pieces. So what is MFA? I'm sure you've all seen this chart in one facet or another, but it's something you know, like your username and password, and it could be passphrases. You know, most of the solutions or all of the solutions that I'll be showing you today work with both password and passphrases. And then you usually get like something back, like a PIN code or a like the RSA token will, you know, give you a code back and you plop that in. And many of us, I'm sure, have put two-factor authentication on most of our bank accounts or our things that are important to us, like your credit cards, et cetera, to do a two-factor authentication. If you haven't done it, you should do it, right? I mean, at least it prevents somebody pretending to be you, and then getting this something that you have, which identifies you, right? So you have your phone, and I'm sure many of us have, you know, received the text that says, oh, here's your code, and then you go enter it in and you get in, right? So that's really important to do, not only on the Z platform, but on your bank accounts, on any of your financial stuff. And I would even say medical stuff. Some of the medical field healthcare providers are now going to two-factor authentication. So your identity is secure with them, right? And then, so it's something that you know, something that you have, and then it's something that you are. A lot of us are not in the something that you are phase with biometrics. I'm sure if you're working in some high facility that's very confidential, you know, like from a government agency, or you're in development of some sort, biometrics are being used. But most of us are using two-factor authentication to get things done. So are there any questions or anything in the Q&A, Ryan?
Nope. Good to go
Okay.
for now.
Thank you. So there are, as I said initially, I'm going to go through a couple of the vendor solutions. We're going to look at IBM's solution first, and then we'll look at Vanguard, and then follow up with Broadcom. So IBM's solution is, you know, it applies to regulatory compliances, right? Like if you're a PCI person, DSS, you know, the credit card industry compliance, and you need to have and prove that you've implemented MFA. This does meet that requirement. If you're running DISA-STIGs, same thing. This IBM's product allows you some flexibility, right? So you can, there's different, and I'll show you which vendors they work with from a vendor perspective to do the actual authentication part where you get your PIN. You will use your RACF database, or IBM MFA also supports ACF2 and Top Secret, and you can deploy it, and it's easy to manage, deploy, and use, because you're really extending your ESM structure. You're saying, okay, yeah, now this user needs to be authenticated using this extra method. So, you know, it's controlled at that level by user ID. So what works with the IBM ZMFA? So they can use RSA, right? There are radius-based factors, some that you may know. Okta is very popular. Gemalto is another one. Microsoft's product, etc. So, and then there's TOT support. You know, you've got the Google authenticity. Rapid identity is another one. And then if you're using, you know, there's out-of-band certificate type authentication where you might have a chip on your ID, or you might be inserting a RFID into your UCB port, right? So there's many different ways. And then again, you can either use password or passphrase in conjunction with any of these authentication methods. So you can use MFA to protect access from more than just your system admins. You could use, you know, IBM's suggestion is that everyone should be covered with MFA. You know, I think there are some people that might not agree with that 100%. I don't know that your end user really needs to be have MFA, right? But certainly, you know, if I start, I'm going to start from the right and go left. I know it's typically the other way, but you know, you really want to start with your systems people, right? Your systems programmers, your DBAs, your storage administrators, your security administrators, anybody around that has like trusted access or trusted attribute, those kinds of things. You really want to lock those down as best you can, and because those are the IDs that are going to be targeted from a bad actor. You might have business partners that access your data, whether it's insurance folks or contractors outside your organization or outsourcers. And then you may have people that have knowledge of your corporate intellectual property that you also might want to lock down, like some executives. They also have a very high access to all your financials, and then engineers. And again, you want to target anybody who could release that has access to stuff that you would not want the public to see, right? So you could have people that manage payroll, credit card processing, traders, those kinds of things. And finally, from a human resource standpoint or healthcare workers, even DMV clerks, right? So again, MFA, it just depends on what your environment is and what your compliance is requiring you to do. But certainly start with the folks that have like the trusted attributes, et cetera. So here's some examples that, how could MFA had made a difference? So let's take the Snowden attack. This was a classic insider attack, right? They will use a variety of mechanisms to obtain passwords from various people. That malicious employee will take the credentials and get access to data that they're not normally allowed to see. And if they happen to get access to a RACF administrator, the damage would be greater, right? Because then they could change access and user IDs to make it better. To make it give them more power. That was the case with Snowden, right? He obtained credentials from both regular and privileged users. So MFA would have made a difference in here because he would have had to, he would have been tapped to acknowledge that he really is this person, and he probably didn't have their phones or their whatever method is being used. The Uber attack in 2016, that one exposed confidential data of 57 million customers and drivers. They used a public GitHub code repository used by Uber engineers that they were able to collect private login credentials to the Amazon cloud, from which they stole a list of rider and driver data. So if that wasn't it wasn't even a privileged account, it was a developer that had access to that data. So again, MFA would have made a difference, right? And then there's a third one here, the Starwood breach and Marriott stuff. One of the things that I also want to point out is that all of the vendors that I'm going to talk about, you can do a POC with them, a proof of concept, and they will help you implement, and so could we, a POC where, the biggest thing out of the POC is that you have to define specific criteria. And that's not always easy, right? Because some people, if I go back a slide here, they may look at these different personas and decide as they tackle one, let's say the system programmers or the security admins may decide that, ooh, let's go tackle the executives and engineers in their POC. So it's really important that you have specific criteria identified to make a successful POC. Another issue that sometimes pops up with these are multi-session managers, right? How does that work with MFA? And it works quite nicely. They're all got a little different quirk. Each of these products has a little different quirk, but it can be done and it is successful, and working through the POC will help you do that. And again, whether your password or passphrases, it accepts both. Okay. I'll pause here. Any questions in the Q&A?
None so far.
Okay. You know, one other point about these, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back again, these individuals is that, you know, it's very helpful if your security is already set up as role-based security, right? And so then you could work through the different roles and decide as a security group whether that role needs to have MFA or not, right? So it's important that if you're not role-based security, and this applies to whether it's RACF, ACF2, or top secret, that you need to start positioning yourself to get to that model, because a lot of things work off of that role-based security. If you're going to do encryption, for example, you want to be role-based. You know, the other point I would make is that it's very important that you encrypt your RACF database, your ACF2 database, and your top secret database. If you haven't started your encryption journey, it's again something along that cyber resiliency that is something that you're going to want to have to do. Okay. So Vanguard's multi-factor authentication, here's an introduction to it. It uses VTAM, so it kind of acts like a session manager, but it will also work with a session manager. But it uses the it's using VTAM as a logon portal that will authenticate users through a one-time use PIN and or token, depending on which ESM, which provider you're using to send your pins back, whether it's Okta or RSA. And by the way, you want to leverage whichever one you're using in your distributed environment. Most likely can be supported by one of these vendors, whether it's IBM, Vanguard, or Broadcom. You know, it kind of works the same way. Once you've been authenticated through the initial set, you'll be permitted to log on to other applications from any Vanguard multi-factor authentication enabled LPAR. So that's how they've set this up. Their you know, the benefits of MFA, according to Vanguard, are, you know, you can use a password or passphrase. It's enhancing your security because it's requiring additional credentials for access. You are providing a single entry point for ZOS host for centralized control and monitoring capabilities. You can authenticate users once and then you can let them loose within your defined network. Administrators and security folks can view and control the status of that's a tough word, authenticated users from any host in the defined network, and et cetera. They support RACF, ACF2, and top secret. They can support radius, challenge, response mode. You can read the charts just as well as I can. And no matter what product you choose, whether it's Vanguard or IBM or Broadcom, make sure you do a POC with them, have well-defined success criteria, and make sure that you're sending your security logging to a SIM, right? If you're doing that for other platforms, you absolutely want to do it for the Z platform. So here's a schematic of how this works. You have a primary logon on the left. This you're coming in, you're providing your user ID and password, and then it's being sent off to your MFA provider on the right, and then you're getting a token or a validation being sent, and then your end user with number 4 here on the left, you're getting your validation is successful, and then it VMA notifies all LPARs. Their supported token providers are listed here on the right. You've got Active Identity, Duo, HotP, OAuth, King Identity, RSA, SafeSign, TOTP, and YubiKey. And then if you do follow-on logons, you don't have to go back out to the MFA provider. It already has it in that in the VTAM Vanguard solution. This is just an example of how it would look if you wanted to also do an Active Directory secondary authentication with a user ID and password. Or if you wanted to do Azure, all of this could be controlled by the single VMA sign-on. Here's another schematic. So I got these charts directly from the vendors. So again, it talks about, you know, the path to get there. You put in your user ID and password, it goes up, it authenticates, then it comes back and says yes, and then you can either fail the logon or it's successful and you let them log in. Again, on the right, it talks about the different token providers that are supported. So trying to think if there's anything else on here I want to say. You can have multiple sessions that are validated. I think we talked about that in the other slide, so that's good. Here's another example using Radius. You would use your, your logon, you would get your token. It would be either approved from the Radius server, come back with a validation, and then let you log in. It's very simple to implement and very simple to get through. So any questions on the Vanguard solution?
No questions, Sandy.
Okay. So Broadcom. If you are an ACF2 or top secret customer, you already have what they call advanced authentication mainframe. It's part of the product, and in here I've included a couple slides that talk about there's some maintenance that may be required for you to put on. You know, in this case, you have to be on ACF2 release 16 or CA top secret release 16. You will be defined whether you have to use RSA or not, and this would be based on the resource rules or permits in ACF2 or top secret. This one, if a user opens a 3270 session and logs in with a user ID and an RSA token or a PIN, PINs are only supported currently for TSO. At logon, the ACF2 or top secret will determine whether you have to have RSA or not, and if so, the agent will be called to process the request and then return your valid user credentials and pass that on, and you'll be able to log on. So they all kind of work the same, a little different, right? But again, this is free to anyone who owns ACF2 and top secret. Why isn't it letting me? It's very odd. I don't know what I did, but it's not letting me. Okay, here we go. Sorry, something weird happened. These are for ACF2. These would be the PTFs that you would require if you want to use PIV or CAC support using CA PAM. That's what you'd want. If you want to use, that's the PTF required. Radius support is this one. RSA token would be this one. And again, these are just for CA ACF2. And then again, IBM's product works with ACF2 as well. Okay. Next one is top secret. Here's the required PTFs or depending on which solution you're going to implement. So that's called Advanced Authentication Mainframe. There's also, which is free, there is a, what do I want to call it? It's a product brief. If you go to Broadcom's website, you can look up the Advanced Authentication Product Brief, and it will discuss all the things that are depicted in the previous two slides. There's also something called Trusted Access Management for Z. So this also reduces the risk of insider threats that could lead to data loss or system outages by streamlining the management of privileged identities on Z. You can elevate and demote existing identities based on business need to eliminate a privileged credential and to eliminate privileged credential sharing and persistent elevation. So what this means is that if you are a sysprog and you've been given, privileged access, you wouldn't have that anymore. You would request it as needed based on whatever changes you need to do or whatever parts of your job you might need to do. So it's kind of given and then taken away kind of thing. And it works for both ACF2 and top secret. And this also provides comprehensive auditing and forensic for all privileged user activity. So again, you want to make sure you're sending your security logging information to your SIM so that it can be evaluated and monitored. I like this method, and the reason why is, as when I was a systems programmer, if I didn't need access to something all the time, I didn't want it for exactly this reason, that somebody could steal my ID, pretend they were me, and do things using my ID without my knowledge. I never wanted it to happen. So we often would just get granted access or privileged access when we wanted to make changes. It kind of takes the, your responsibility and lowers it until you really need it, right, for a change or what have you. So how does this work? You might create a service desk ticket if you need to. You're in there, you're going to explain what you need these privileges for. They're going to be obviously validated through your service desk creation, your ticket, right, through its approval. You're going to elevate a privilege that they need through manually or through automation, depending on what it is. You're going to send that off to your SIM, and you're going to do your logging to SMF, as we always do. You're going to perform your privileged tasks. The time box expires so that the privileges are removed. User can de-elevate their privilege or wait for the time box to expire. Typically, we waited for the time box to expire, and then you go back to your regular permissions. It's a nice way to take away privileges and only have what you need when you need it. So what does Trusted Access Management for Z do? It reduces credential sharing, right? Some clients, if you're in an operations area, you don't have to log on individually in some cases. Some people do that. This reduces, you're not going to do that in this case, right? Every individual should have their own user ID and password. You're going to, this is delivering trust and efficiency, right? Because everything is being aligned with your ServiceNow tickets or whatever ticketing environment you're using, and it's going to be correlated with change in your environment. This aligns with security workflows and offers advanced auditing and forensics. So every time you elevate or de-elevate somebody, there is a record cut, and it is, if you're doing live SIM integration, it's being sent right away. or SMF records for post usage. So I had the opportunity to listen to a couple of hackers, and the first thing that they grab is your security database. So when I say make sure you're encrypting it, I'm not kidding, because that's exactly what they're going after. And they're going to use it, and they're going to, because they know the schematics behind the security databases, and they're going to go look for privileged IDs and, you know, use them. The only thing that he said that could make this more difficult is MFA. So why MFA? If somebody does get a hold of your credentials, this makes it a little more difficult for them to continue forward. And I left this on here because being a security architect is, if you are compliant, are you secure? No. Just because you're compliant doesn't mean you have everything locked down that you should. Every environment's different. Compliance is different depending on if you're in healthcare, if you're in insurance, or if you're in the financial community versus if you're in manufacturing. So this applies to everybody. So Brian, are there any questions that came up?
No, but there's a good comment I would share from Carla. Thank you. She said, Trusted Access Manager for Z is also available for free with your current ACF2 or top secret license like AAM. So thank you, Carla.
Yeah, thank you, Carla. And speaking of thanking Carla, she's the one that sent me the information from Broadcom. So thank you for that. Thanks to IBM for their information as well, and Vanguard. So if there are no questions or anything, that's all the information I have. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen today, and hopefully we'll see you soon.